folks, I have seen the King of the Hill revival, all 10 episodes in fact, and I am unbelievably excited and relieved to say it's easily my favorite animated revival we've ever gotten. That isn't to say there aren't any growing pains or that it's completely flawless, but the characters remain faithful to the original run, and the new aged up premise slash hook breathes new life into the show without changing it fundamentally. It somehow feels both incredibly new and exciting, while also feeling like you're spending time with your closest, oldest friend. This video is going to be as non-spoilery as possible, giving my first impressions, likes, and dislikes about the new season, and then next week, after the season drops, I'll start releasing episode breakdowns one by one, covering all 10 episodes, so stay tuned. Okay, so I'm doing this review operating under the impression that you know the general setup of the new series from the intro, trailers, clips, and series synopsis. If you want to go in completely blind, probably not the video for you, but this will absolutely refrain from any super detailed spoilers. So let's talk about this new premise. I think one of the reasons this show works unquestionably well and so much better than many other animated revivals is specifically because they opted for the time skip aged up premise. The result is something that both feels familiar and new, faithfully delivering the characters we know and love who are now dealing with entirely new stages of their lives. As you know from the trailers and synopsis, Hank and Peggy are retired now, but this completely removes the structure from their lives that they were previously used to. This is obviously a real thing that many people deal with in life, not knowing how to fill their time after they've stopped working, but particularly for a character like Hank Hill, this makes for a really fascinating new hook. Many episodes are now focused on Hank trying out new hobbies and exploring new part-time opportunities to fill his schedule. Hank is obviously a bit of a stubborn character who is very set in his ways and routine, so being forced a tiny bit out of his comfort zone in these ways makes for some really satisfying stories. Not too far out of his comfort zone, he's still Hank Hill, but it's a character who is pursuing things he maybe previously wouldn't have in an attempt to be more fulfilled in his post-retirement life. It's a great new place for Hank to be and makes for great stories. Hank often pursues something that's exciting to him, and then some unforeseen side effect of that pursuit will challenge him in a new way. And then we've got Bobby, who is working in Dallas, now running his own restaurant as head chef. And this is the side of the show that really feels like something new, given that it really is a completely new environment in addition to being a new stage in Bobby's life. Seeing Bobby navigate his craft and socializing as a young professional is really interesting, particularly because most everyone else Bobby's age is in college, so it creates for a really interesting separation and dynamic. I love that they rightfully evolved Bobby's impressive social skills that he'd always portrayed across the series. He was always a goofy kid, but he was also always confident and pretty smooth. People always liked Bobby. He has charisma, and that follows him through to young adulthood as well. Okay, let's talk about the whole Saudi Arabia thing. I know that many people just take issue with the very idea that Hank and Peggy have been in Saudi Arabia in the interim period here, working in propane on an Aramco base. And I guess if you just can't get past that, there's not much I can say to convince you, but I think the show does a very good job explaining how Hank and Peggy's life in this frozen in time, white picket fence company town would be attractive to them. They had a very sheltered, cushy life, making a ton of money for retirement, while Hank works at a high level in his dream career, and they definitely don't make it seem like this was an easy decision for Hank either. He loves Texas, he still feels entirely in character. And Hank sort of being separated from the gradual cultural changes back in Arlen really aids the dynamic that made the original show work so well. Hank's resistance and discomfort at the state of modern cultural norms. The fact that so much about modern society is so confusing to him. And by removing Hank from the sort of boiling pot of change over 8 years, a lot of those changes feel even more dramatic to him. And that creates for really fun and funny conflict. But I think the thing I love the most is the evolution of Hank and Bobby's relationship. There is still this sort of generational divide between Hank and Bobby that was present in the old show. But now, Hank is even less familiar with the modern world, and Bobby has actually grown to be a pretty competent young professional. It really helps bolster that dynamic. Hank has to adapt to the fact that Bobby's confidence and know-how are actually genuine, but also Hank being a bit removed from a lot of aspects of modern society helps give Bobby a bit of perspective. I also love that this now shifts a lot of the workplace comedy to Bobby's side of things and the extracurricular comedy to Hank's side of things. It's a slight subversion of the original series. But overall, all of the characters feel completely faithful in their characterization without feeling stagnant. Peggy, Nancy, Dale, Bill, Boomhauer, Joseph, Connie, they all feel like the characters we remember, but they've also all moved into slightly new stages of life. I also found that a lot of these stories had a really really lovely sentimental quality. Of course, a lot of the original show had this as well, but I think because we're just getting 10 episodes a year now, that quality feels a bit more prominent. But it's tapping into one of the things that made the series hit emotionally for so many fans over the years, and I'm really glad that there isn't any sort of underlying cynicism in the new stories and messages. Another really interesting byproduct of the series' shift to 10 episode seasons is that parts of it actually feel a lot more serialized. Particularly the Bobby side of the season sort of has a pretty clear through line and story. Now, obviously, there were many serialized aspects of the original show as well, but with 20 plus episodes per year back then, the continuity and progression actually feels a lot more focused story to story in the 10 episode format. It also sort of made me understand why they opted for a binge release, even if that still isn't quite my preference. Okay, I've gushed about the series a lot. Let's talk about some of the growing pains. I think overall, there's not really a bad episode in the bunch, but the first episode back, Return of the King, does have to do a lot of table setting for the new premise. Most of the runtime is not just spent establishing our main characters' new places in life, but also reacquainting us with every one of our side characters and where they've been over the interim 8 years. I think the episode does have a great dilemma and resolution, but it feels a little thin because so much of it was spent sort of bringing us back up to speed. But ultimately, I still think the episode does what it needed to do. Also, while I do love the fact that we get so much focus on Bobby in this new location and time in his life, because he is no longer primarily in Arlen, there's a bit less overlap between the Hank-Peggy stories and the Bobby stories. They do, of course, find many ways to overlap in certain episodes across the season, but the episodes where their stories are completely separate do sort of feel like we're watching two different shows simultaneously, and it sometimes makes me wish that each episode was like 5 minutes longer just to get a bit more substance in each plotline. It feels like in the old series, we might get a scene that overlaps the A and B stories and acts as progression for both stories simultaneously, and to me, you can sort of feel that missing beat when the stories are more separate. One thing that I'm sure many fans will like, but I maybe didn't love, is that there were a few too many cute callbacks to events of the original series. And look, I'm all for callbacks. Of course you want to harken back to the original run in some way, but some of them just felt a little bit sweaty in execution, a tad unnatural. But overall, it's just nice to know that the writers still have a major fondness for the old episodes. I do think that you can sort of feel the loss of certain characters. Cotton to a lesser degree, but particularly Luann. I think she brought a particular brand of ditzy earnestness that was such a great foil to Hank and Peggy, and also created for a really fun dynamic with Bobby. It's hard to understate how much I wish Brittany Murphy was still around to reprise her role. And I don't think this counts as a spoiler, and I think it's better that I let y'all know before going in. Unless I missed something, they don't directly address where Luann and Lucky are in the show, which was a bit disappointing. But the writers have said that they wrote them off in a very specific way, so I anticipate that there will be an episode next year that super directly addresses their absence, and I guess we just gotta be patient. I was also disappointed that Khan is not in the season very much. I felt even though he was still a character, there was a bit of a hole left in the cast without him being utilized as often. And I do feel like the show maybe could have done a bit more to fill those character gaps with new characters. Some older characters get a bit more focus, but there also seemed like really natural places where we could have filled the roster more. Keith David plays Brian Robertson, who lived in the Hills house when they were away. We see him in the intro and a bit in the trailers. And I mean, it's Keith David. What an opportunity. And it feels like they start to flesh out his character, but he isn't a particularly big presence by the end of the season. So I really hope he gets a bit more development as the revival continues. This feels like a natural place to talk about the voice performances, particularly given the character losses, recasts, and how long it's been since the original run. I know some people expressed a bit of concern over some of the voice performances from the trailers, but I'm happy to say that the original actors don't really miss a beat. Hank sounds like Hank, Peggy sounds like Peggy, etc. I know there is a subsect of fans who think that they should have recast Bobby to make him sound older, and I don't think I can properly express how bad of an idea I think that would be. Pamela Adlon is Bobby Hill, and frankly, Bobby Hill doesn't really sound like a kid. Bobby Hill sounds like a cartoon character. No kid on earth sounds like Bobby Hill. But I also think that Pamela does actually deepen modern Bobby a subtle but noticeable amount, enough that makes me feel like he has gotten a bit older, but also like we aren't losing the character we love. I truly think a recast would have been catastrophic for Bobby Hill, and I think Pamela's doing an excellent job in the revival. She's really killing it. Speaking of recasts, let's talk about about Dale. Now, obviously, we lost Johnny Hardwick after he had already recorded a handful of episodes, but interestingly, the 6 episodes he's in, they actually feature both dialogue recorded by Johnny Hardwick and Dale's new voice actor, Toby Huss. I think, as far as the growing pains in recasting goes, this is when it's most noticeable. Going between Johnny and Toby really highlights the differences, and it can be a little distracting. However, I do think Toby does an incredible job as Dale. It's not one-to-one, but in the back part of the season where Toby takes over entirely, I really appreciated the performance he delivered, and I'm genuinely excited to see him continue to be this character moving forward. We also got a recast for Joseph Gribble. Early in the show, he was played by Brittany Murphy, and then after his voice changed, he was played by Breckin Meyer. Now he is played by Ty LeClaire, and I'm happy to say that he really captures the spirit of Joseph. It truly feels like a young adult version of the character. It's just excellent casting. Ronnie Chang takes over for Khan, and we really only get his performance in a single episode, so I'm eager to hear him grow into the role more, but I think this was the recast I had the most trouble with, and it's really not anything to do with the performance. He does capture the spirit of Khan pretty well. It's really just that with Ronnie, Khan sounds younger than he used to sound, even though the character is actually supposed to be older now. He doesn't do a bad job, and he has some great line deliveries, but it's just a bit distracting that my read on the voice is now younger than he used to be, especially all these years later. We also get what might be the final performances from Jonathan Joss as John Redcorn, who was tragically murdered back in June. Joss doesn't get a ton of screen time here, but his performance is as good as it always was, and I'm really grateful that we got to hear him in this role again. It is possible, and maybe even probable, that they've actually already recorded Joss's lines for season 15. I know they actually wrapped season 15 pretty recently, so it would probably make sense that he's already recorded. So we'll probably get more from him next year, but we'll have to just wait and see. It will be interesting to see if they opt to retire the character or recast Redcorn in any future seasons beyond next year. Joss was actually the second actor to play the role, so I definitely think it's possible that they would bring in another actor in the future. Also, of course, I'll briefly talk about the animation. I know a lot of people have been really critical of how the show looks. I've even expressed some disappointment in it, and yeah, it does look different. But honestly, after watching all 10 episodes, I not only got used to the show's new look, but I actually grew to really like it. I think the claims of stiff characters are overblown, and some of those issues definitely stemmed from timing adjustments in the trailer editing. And through 10 episodes, I honestly just felt like I was watching King of the Hill again. I think the vast majority of audiences aren't going to see much of an issue with how the new season looks, but it is of course a subjective thing. Some people won't like it. That's fine. That's just how it is. But all in all, despite a few growing pains and some of the obstacles they had to address, I can't really overstate how happy I am about King of the Hill season 14. It was genuinely such a joy to spend time with these characters again and get to see their lives actually progress after 13 seasons of the floating timeline, barely aging sitcom world. I really think it's going to go down as one of the best revivals ever, and based on these 10 episodes, I hope this thing gets renewed again and again, because I just want to keep these characters in my life for at least the foreseeable future. And that is all I've got for you. Starting Monday, August 4th, I should have individual breakdowns starting to release very frequently until I've covered all 10 episodes, and I cannot wait to hear what y'all think about the new season. I'll see you guys then. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.